Go Big 12 or go home. I'm Brandon Shanahan, joined as always by Iowa broadcasting legend Drew Russell. Boy, oh boy, what a time to be a host of a Big 12
Ooh,
podcast.
what a time to be alive in general, Brandon. And not just that, to be the host of one of the great podcasts in this country, Big 12 or Go Home. What a slate this last weekend. And what a November we've got cooking in the world of football. Oh, me, oh, my. I can't wait.
Yeah, turning the page to November. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to leave a like.
Mhm.
Tell us how great we are. We don't even care if you're honest. We just need the positive encouragement to keep going. Same thing on Spotify or Apple Music or however you're listening to us. Just lie to us. Tell us how great we are. We need that. But outstanding stuff going on here in the Big 12. What a kooky week. I'll say
Yeah.
I have never had a looser grip on how I think this conference is going to go, and that's the beauty of it, is that you can be
Yeah.
beat by anybody at any time. Which is, the tough thing about playing 9 conference games, which teams like the SEC folks don't get.
Yeah.
So there's my piece of anti-SEC propaganda. Play 9 conference games, and it's crazy how much more chaos gets squeezed in when you're not playing McNeese State in November.
Well, what's amazing about this week is you have Oklahoma loses to Kansas for the first time since the 90s. And I love that I don't see that's a matchup that's going to be revitalized for a long time. So I love that
No.
Kansas will be the ones that have like that over their head forever. Like that, hey, you owned us in this series, and OU has done to most teams, but like we got you that final time.
Final time, and now you're running away. Now
Ran
you're
away.
ducking the smoke.
I gotta say, I gotta give the Kansas students a lot of credit. I mean, there was a delay in the game due to weather, and look, some went home, but those that stayed, and kudos. I know you saw the video afterward of them carrying that goalpost all the way to that lake, and then chucking that bad boy in. What a run!
What a run.
I mean, what a run for Kansas, and we'll dig more into that. But that was special. And then you got Oklahoma State that's on cruise control right now. And they've got, the best player nobody's talking about in Ollie Gordon. This kid is going off, Brandon. I mean, good, not 271 rushing yards this week on 2 TDs. No one's talking about him. This kid, honest to God, he'd be a Heisman candidate the way he's played the last 5 weeks. He's been great. Iowa State beats Baylor handedly. They're all of a sudden rolling. Texas crushes BYU. K-State over Houston badly. And West
That's a
Virginia,
shutout.
how about that? What? Yes, in a shutout. I mean, that was a Houston offense that had been playing pretty well the last 2-3 weeks.
Yeah.
So a shutout's pretty impressive.
And it's
So,
hard to shut
what a
out
run.
anybody, let alone, a conference team like that in Houston. And now, whether or not you want to give them their flowers because of, where they come from, it is what it is. But that's a shellacking. And it's really easy in that kind of shellacking to take your foot off the gas pedal and then let a little sneaky score, a sneaky field goal in. But not Kansas State. They were dialed in front to back.
Yeah. So, I mean, just a week and then some. But obviously the major storyline nationally, and one, definitely going to begin the podcast with, is that KU Oklahoma game, because that had a little bit of everything. Turnover laden. Both teams had 3 turnovers apiece. OU could not get a third down to save their life. I think they had over 100 yards in penalties as well, which absolutely crushed them. And for a team that played so well, beats Texas going into their bye, barely sneaks past against a Central Florida team that probably hasn't played up to their best yet, and then to lose on the road to a very pesky KU team, but one that still has not found great consistency at the quarterback position the last few weeks. Pretty wild loss for OU, and for KU, what a freaking win. The absolute embarrassment of Power 5 football for a decade was KU football. And Lance Leipold and his crew have come in, done a phenomenal job. These kids battled their tails off. And KU football, we've sung its praises throughout the year, but man, what a special turnaround the last couple of years.
No kidding, man. I mean, you hit it right on the head there. That's how you got the right guy to build that program. It's a shame that he'll be in East Lansing or somewhere next year, maybe in Starksville wherever he's going to end up, it'll be a bummer. But man, what a job that he's done. Because you're right, they're not just like a not so great football program. They were the laughing stock of college football for a decade. I
Yep.
they, the way that they have turned around so quickly to being like a competent college football program is incredible. And because you know they're not getting great talent. I mean, Jalen Daniels was awesome last year before he got hurt. Well, I doubt that we'll see him again this year, but even Jason Bean. But you hit the nail right on the head with these guys are just playing hard. They believe in what they're doing. They believe that they can do anything on any given day, and that shows, especially in a game that you get out of your rhythm with the weather delay, and it's not cold. It's not as full as you'd like it to be because of that. And then you have Oklahoma, who I would have expected to come in a little bit more buttoned up after their performance last week, but nonetheless, Kansas took advantage of this opportunity, and voila.
You want to hear Kansas' record? So Mark Mangino did a really good job with Kansas in the 2000s. They went to the Orange Bowl. They won an Orange Bowl. Found some consistency. Since he left in 2009, Brandon, you ready to hear some records quick
Let me
before
hear it.
Lance Leipold took over in 2021? Here we go. 3-9, 2-10, 1-11, 3-9, 3-9, 0-12, 2-10, 1-11, 3-9, 3-9, 0-9.
Incredible.
Before Lance Leipold took over.
That is awful.
Pretty brutal, to put it lightly. And even though they still have not officially had a winning season under Coach Leipold, now they have 6 wins now, so they get one more. Doesn't matter what happens the rest of the way. They'd have a winning season for the first time since 2008, which is a long time. No matter the program, whether good or bad, that's a long time. So, like, what Coach Leipold and that staff has done for a job that nobody's wanted to go to. I mean, here are the coaches that have been there. You have Turner Gill, Charlie Weiss, David Beatty, and Les Miles. And most of them are not in the profession, or at least not coaching anymore. So
shout out Turner Gill, Husker quarterback legend. I forgot that Les Miles was the coach there. That's crazy.
Yep. And Charlie Weiss too. I mean, that was a big deal when they got him. He left Notre Dame, but they thought, well, he had success at Notre Dame. To get him, they thought he'd turn around, and the only people that benefited there were the restaurants. So there you go.
You're wrong there.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, we're finally recovering from the loss.
Good.
Of,
I gotta say,
Mangino.
Lawrence, Kansas restaurants between Mark Mangino and Charlie Weiss, they stayed in business for a bit, a little longer. They're still in business because of that.
Tell you what, Russell, there's a grocery store up the street from my house, and their deli would put together like these prepackaged like giant sub sandwiches, and I would get one like 2 or 3 times a week. Like, but whenever I had any money as like a 16, 17-year-old, I knew that was the best value. It's like, it's the sandwich, it's already put together. I'm gonna go buy it, easy breezy. And then I moved, to out of town after high school, and my dad went up there a couple of weeks afterwards, or a couple months after, because he was like, these big sandwiches are awesome. Let me go get one. They didn't have any, and he's asking the deli like, hey, you used to always have these. And like, well, suddenly nobody's buying them anymore, and so now we're at a loss. So I know what it's like to change the kind of food economics, and that's just me. I mean, that's just me eating a couple of sandwiches a week. I can't imagine the miles that those guys were putting on, the lights they were keeping on.
Yeah, I mean, that sandwich probably they should have just called it the Monday Mangino or something. You could really, if that was a Lawrence grocery store, that's what they do. But I mean, but again, to go back to just the coaches and just the struggles that the Kansas program has seen, this has been quite a turnaround. And for them, last year was such a great story. They go 6-6, make a bowl game. That was a big deal to do that. This year, it seems they're continuing to take those positive steps. See if they can find a winning season. They'll see if they can find another win or 2 or more, maybe this coming month of November. But a special year, and the wild part is, maybe the wildest part of this win is not necessarily people were stunned that Kansas was able to pull it off. Like, yes, it's an upset. Yes, OU is playing, good ball throughout the season, but nobody was like, how on earth did this happen? No. I mean, Kansas has been a team the last couple of years that have given programs problems, and it came to fruition on Saturday.
Yeah, and like I said, this is what happens when you play 9 conference games. I mean, this is the game that the SEC teams are avoiding and
Mm-hmm.
playing because you look on paper, yeah, absolutely, Oklahoma is the better football team and they have the more talent and this or that, but you still have to win these games. And in a conference as deep as the Big 12 is, which I feel like it does never gets it its proper flowers for how deep of a conference it is, especially on a year like this where everybody had written off 12 of the 14 teams coming into the season. Now we got a 5-way tie turning the calendar to November.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at, team like Alabama was going to get a warm-up game before their big rivalry game, and same thing
Mm-hmm.
with a couple of those teams you use that for good. Like South Carolina always plays Clemson at the end of the season, and this and that. But that matters. And for
Mm-hmm.
the SEC to have gotten this pass over the last 15 years, where nobody mentions it, nobody mentions how big of a deal that is that they get to manipulate the schedule in the way that they do with that extra non-conference
Mm-hmm.
game. Yeah, and that's same thing with the Pac-12. They're
Yeah.
they feast on one another year in and year out. So even if there was a team who, could have competed with a team like Ohio
Mm-hmm.
State or Oklahoma back in their heyday, we never got to see it
Yeah.
because, they have that 9 conference game that the SEC doesn't have to deal with.
What's interesting as well about this just situation is now with Oklahoma losing, there are no undefeated teams left in the conference. And what will be interesting going forward in November, October turned out to be a month of chaos, and usually it is. And now November, this is where kind of the seasons are made or established kind of from a legacy standpoint. And I think the question going forward is, look, if OU bounces back, they win out, say they get another matchup with Texas or, K-State, they still have a shot at making the college football playoff. Probably the same with Texas, especially if they've got that right situation.
Yeah.
You look at kind of the rest of that conference, though, Brandon, and Texas and Oklahoma are the only teams that have one loss. And to put it frankly, if either one of those two programs pick up one more loss, Big 12 is
They're
not going
done.
to have
Yeah.
a representative in the college football playoff. And though it would be sad, I think it also shows how unpredictable this league is, how entertaining this league is, and that if you don't show up week in and week out, somebody's going to take advantage of that, which other leagues, I'm not saying that they don't have it, but it shows just the chaos that this conference has had for many years now.
Yeah, and you kind of look at how it plays out. Like it's fun to talk about it now with like there's 5 teams at the top of the conference, but you still kind of look at Oklahoma and Texas as well. They're kind of in control of everything. Although next week we'll have to take a look at some scenarios and see
Yeah.
because it's not just you can't just assume that you have a head-to-head matchup with these teams at the top. But as we get into, I mean, we'll narrow out some teams after this week. But yeah, and I've always banged the table for the Big 12, whether it was Oklahoma or whether it was TCU last year. But it would, I think. Do you think that it would be better for the conference to not have Oklahoma and Texas in the playoff now that they're leaving?
It's a good question. Still from like the revenue money that the conference would get based on that participation, for me personally, I'm okay with it. Just it helps every one of those member universities. Yet I understand from that image standpoint of like, man, hey, because those schools will just say, well, we're representing the SEC. Yes, they still have Big 12 on the uniform patch, but we're an SEC school now. This is just to be expected.
Yeah.
So I feel like from that perspective, if you ask me whether I care or not, if I'd rather have, one of those two teams rep the Big 12 this year or just let it be and no one reps it, I'd probably be more okay with just no one repping it this year. I don't really care at this point, but it depends on how you look at it. If I'm looking from a financial standpoint and helping out schools that you like, or your favorite school in the conference, then yeah, I still would probably support it just to get a little extra money in that university and help those programs.
Yeah, it's tough to say because you're absolutely right. I don't know. I guess like statistically, it would be like a Big 12 school making the playoff, but there kind of goes this narrative that once Oklahoma and Texas leaves the conference, the Big 12 is not going to be able to compete at the highest level,
Hmm.
which obviously isn't true. We saw TCU win a playoff game when we still
Hmm.
haven't seen that from Oklahoma or Texas. So I think that matters more to me than any financial aspect of it. Just keeping that, like, we still have a team who's won a playoff game,
Hmm.
and it was neither of the teams that have left the conference. Cincinnati's made a playoff appearance and this and that. I think that's we talk a lot about momentum, especially this year and going into this new landscape of college football next year.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that momentum, I think, would be kind of diminished if Oklahoma or Texas were to be the
Yeah.
Big 12 representative and then leave the conference.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting debate, is because college football's king. All the conference realignment is based on college football, all that. That said, though, Brent Yormark, Big 12 commissioner, I know this man has a pretty big soft spot for college hoops. And when you look at the Big 12, and this could be a whole different podcast and their conversation, but for football, you go into next year. Are they going to take a step back, at least from a historical perspective, big name perspective? Yes, temporarily. I mean, losing two powers like OU, Texas, that's going to hurt, I think, any conference. That's just
Yeah.
simple math, whether you like it or not. The four teams they got coming in for the Pac 12 next year are going to be very entertaining. I mean, Colorado clearly has been a headlining team this season. Utah has been really good. They got hit hard this last week, but they've been really good the last few years. The two Arizona schools are battling right now. Arizona's seen
Yeah.
a little bit of a revival, and they're playing better football as of late. So, those are nice additions for football, and hopefully, as time goes, that they can learn to compete with those big boys at a consistent level. And I think they can. Basketball, though, I mean, holy buckets! What a effort to bring in those four new teams, and you look at the four teams they added this year, and adding Houston, who's been a power the last few years. Cincinnati is usually a pretty gritty team, and BYU's had some nice teams the last few years. Central Florida, they've had their moments in the sun as well. And then you add a power like Arizona into the mix. Arizona State's usually pretty interesting under Bobby Hurley. Colorado's had some success at times, and Utah's had some nice teams. So Big 12 basketball wise, football wise, probably not going to be at the top, but basketball wise, they could be the best in the country for quite a few years potentially because they have so many different powers. But football, it will take time. I do think that will be a little bit of an adjustment starting next year, but there are the systems in place to see success.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it'll work out pretty well for the Big 12 football wise. But there is this fear that, a few years in, you kind of get to this, big or power three narrative as far as conferences go.
Yeah.
And that to me is worst case scenario. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm really, and the real determining factor on this, I think, is going to be how they reformat the playoff,
Mm-hmm.
because we have 2024 and 2025. Then the initial contract is up, so then we redo everything, start from a
Yeah.
blank slate, which I'm sure that they'll absolutely look at everything. And if there's not a clear cut path for the Big 12, um, then I think that's real trouble. So I think that's why it's so important these next couple of years, whether it's the new Pac-12 schools coming in making a difference, because
Yeah.
it would be such a shame for like a Coach Prime led team to go win 10 games and still miss out on a college football playoff appearance when there's 12 or 16 teams in, just because there's
Right.
this narrative that the Big 12 isn't as so far removed that they'd rather have a 3 or 4 loss Big 10 or a 3 or 4 loss
Yeah.
SEC team.
What's and you make some phenomenal points, Brandon, about that college football playoff. Like, if it was still a 4-team playoff, I'd be terrified, to be brutally
Absolutely.
honest with you. Like, I'd be thinking, For a Big 12 team to make it, they'd have to go undefeated and
That's a
play at some
start. Like,
decent non-conference. And it would almost be similar to like what Cincinnati had to go through a few years ago, where
yeah,
they had to go undefeated, didn't make the playoff, then go undefeated again in the regular season.
yeah,
Then finally got the respect of, okay, let's put them in as the 4 seed. And they didn't win, but they were competitive against Alabama and were a deserving team to make it. And maybe
yeah.
the year before too. I think with that 12-team field, it does open up that gate of at least the Big 12's going to have a seat at the table, or so it be, but they're still working it out after all the conference realignment. But what's really exciting, Brandon, I'm not going to lie to you, it starts in 2024. Next year is the beginning of the 12-team playoff. And I'm going through the schedule right now, and goodness, this sounds electric. First games, they'll have 4 games the first weekend, December 20th and 21st. The quarterfinals, one will be on New Year's Eve, and then the other 3 will be on New Year's Day. It'll be about 11 straight hours of football. Semifinals will be January 9th, January 10th on a Thursday and Friday, which is kind of interesting.
Interesting.
And then the national championship game will be January 20th, which that is, I'll put that bluntly, that's late. I think,
That
the
is
latest
very
college football game probably in history, if I had to guess. I'm not sure, but
I mean, probably by
gotta
a
be in the
fair
ballpark.
margin. I mean, I feel like this whole play in the second weekend of January has been pretty
Yeah,
recent, and
yeah,
that seems like, but wow, yeah, late January, huh?
late January. And now that schedule, that's going to be sheer electricity, to get that type of a, schedule. But it's going to be a long process instead of what
Yeah.
was pretty much a 1.5 week process between semis and finals. They're drawing it into a month now, which is really interesting to me.
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of time to talk between those games, a lot of time to build narratives for or against the Big 12 based on how they do, which is
Yep.
why I think that's the next couple of years, it's huge. Because if the Big 12 goes, how it's set up the next couple of years is that there is a seat for a Big 12 team, whoever the conference champion is, with the automatic qualifiers there. If they go out in back-to-back years and throw out absolute stinkers, where
Yeah.
they're losing to the group of 5 team who gets in, or a team, a 3 or 4 loss Big 10 team, or 2-3 loss SEC team, they're just getting spanked. That's a horrible look, and that's where this worst case scenario kind of comes into play.
Yes, I would fully agree with that, and that will be something for the future that we'll look at. Obviously, for this year, which is still the 4 teams. Again, OU and Texas are. If there's going to be representatives out of the Big 12 for the college football playoff, those will still be the 2 representatives unless absolute mayhem happens. But that said, though, with this exciting big race coming up for the Big 12 for Dallas in December, again, whoever wins gets a New Year's Six Bowl guaranteed, no matter your record. And that's an exciting time for these teams. And, I don't know what game you want to look at next, but just a whole row of interesting scenarios and games ahead, including the results from this last weekend.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, before we kind of dive into the crazy slate this week coming up, last team I kind of wanted to talk about is Iowa State. We're in November, Drew Russell, and they're at first place in the Big 12. Who would have thought?
What a world we live in. I mean, if you said to me after the Ohio game in September that this is where Iowa State would be, I'll tell you what, I would not have believed you. I would have said there's absolutely no chance. I don't think you could have asked the most spirited Iowa State fans at that juncture that this is where they would be. But, there's the famed Brocktober when Brock Purdy was QB, and now we've got Rocktober for our guy, Rocco Beck. I mean, this is our guy, and he's balling out right now. He's playing great football. They have a running game. The defense has been really, really improved. They were able to get into the backfield a decent amount this week for some sacks. They were able to create havoc. So just a great team win overall. They're 9 of 15 on third down. We're able to win the time of possession. And this Iowa State team, Brandon, you have to hand it to them. They can start 1-2 on the season. They've won 4 of 5. Have picked up some nice wins across the board. Their November schedule is pretty difficult, but a great win for them. And for Baylor, man, they just another kind of listless performance from them. I mean, Iowa State played well. Baylor also in the rain. They only had the crowd, not a very big crowd on hand with the rain coming down. Just not a strong showing overall for the Bear team on Saturday. I think pretty disappointing effort on their end. But for Iowa State, got to be pleased with how they played. And a lot of that was on them for the victory.
Yeah, and I mean, huge shout out to Matt Campbell in the same way that we give Lance Leopold his flowers for that performance he's had in Kansas and building that program. Matt Campbell, holy smokes, what a bad draw that he's been dealt. You have truly NFL caliber players in Brock Purdy and Bryce Hall, and others leave the program, graduate, go to the NFL, and then you have to rebuild there. You have a stinker of a year last year, and then you have all the gambling stuff going on in the offseason. What a job by him to just put on the headphones on these guys. A crazy young team. I think there's like 24 freshmen playing regularly on this team. It's just insane stuff to be able to have any success. I mean, it was a pretty consensus pick at the beginning of the year, myself included. I'll eat some crow gladly. That had Iowa State as the bottom feeder of this conference, or at the very least, the bottom feeder of the Hateful Eight. Excluding the new American schools. But what a job! I mean, what a place to be.
I fully agree. And for them to finish dead last in the Big 12 last year, you mentioned it, that offseason betting scandal, a lot of times it goes off the rails. And boy, did it feel like it did through 3 weeks. You lose to Iowa, then you lose to Ohio. And I remember you and I were talking about, this was a while ago, but back in September when Oklahoma State and Iowa State faced off against each other. And Oklahoma State was coming off that pretty horrid loss to South Alabama. And, you and I were joking. We're like, what are the future of these two coaches? Guys that have had success. And even though you didn't feel like Matt Campbell's job was in trouble, and it wasn't, but it was like, there was concerns about what is the direction of this program right now. Well, we found that direction. So is Oklahoma State, and it's paid off. And so for Iowa State, a heck of a effort, and they should be very, very pleased with how they looked on Saturday, and obviously setting up a big one this week with KU. So
big one, and not the only big one. So kind of jump into here. We'll give our picks here later, so we won't dive too deep into this. But holy smokes, what a slate! I mean, you have the top 6 teams in the Big 12 playing each other unanimously. Like there's
doesn't happen. You get Oklahoma State playing great. They play OU, Texas State, Kansas State, Iowa, Kansas. You're dead right, Brandon. Top 6 teams all face off against another.
I mean, what a draw! I don't know how much this was foreseen. If there's anybody who could have foreseen, this 5-way tie at the top of the conference going into November and setting up a elite Week 10 slate, it would be Brett Yormark, I'd say for sure. So hats off to him. And now, granted, you also have TCU and Texas Tech, which very well could have been a very big game if they didn't stink. UCF Cincinnati is going to be a great AAC rivalry between those two former Group of 5 juggernauts. You probably would have slated Kansas and Iowa State being the stinker of the games. And then you have BYU and West Virginia, who you only have so many teams. Houston and Baylor, Central Texas matchup. What
a run. What a slate. Again, I think, when they probably put this schedule together, they get Bedlam this week. You knew that was going to be a game with headlines, no matter what. I think no matter the records, it was going to have some headlines. And they got 2 teams that are pretty competent right now. K-State, Texas was, I think, going to be a game with some headlines, considering K-State, Big 12 champion last year. They're going to look to see what they can do against Texas. But yeah, Iowa State and Kansas, that was not exactly a game. I think they're thinking, hey, we're going to be putting this on ESPN primetime back a couple months ago. So pretty wild when you look at how things played out. But a fun slate this week, Brandon. I mean, we got all our teams back in action, which is obviously a lot of fun.
Yeah, just a great week. And obviously, like college football, all in all, is going to be great this week. The SEC has some matchups going on, the Big Ten with a couple of big ones. But, man, oh man, what a time to be alive here.
Yeah, and all of our teams that we mentioned with the premier teams are playing great. We didn't dig much into some of these other games. I mean, again, Oklahoma State demolished Cincinnati. I mean, not even close at 45-13. Just a absolute clinic, and their defense is continuing to show improvement. They were able to really create havoc for the Cincinnati offense throughout the majority of the day. Texas crushes BYU. I mean, BYU, I was surprised. I thought they'd be a little bit more competitive in Austin, and give Texas a lot of credit. And Malik Murphy passes his first test as starter. Having Jonathan Brooks in the backfield doesn't hurt. And then that defense was pretty nasty. BYU of under 300 yards. And then we mentioned K-State as well. Kansas State, a shutout win, 41-0 over Houston. That defense was absolutely filthy. These numbers, Brandon, not exactly ideal team stats for Houston. Only 208 total yards, 2 turnovers, 3rd of 14 on third down, only 11 first downs the whole game. So K-State, as you said earlier, a shutout doesn't exactly happen too often in college football. So our top teams playing great. Of course, West Virginia, they have a winning conference record as well. They're tied with KU. If so, they're probably in the upper half, and they were able to get a nice win this last week as well, behind 5 total team rushing touchdowns against Central Florida, 41-28. So our big boys playing well right now, and that's what makes, I think, this weekend special.
Well, perfect. Lots of good stuff going on here in Corner Street Connection. Daily college football content. As a Cornhusker, network, we're excited up north. It should be a great week. Probably the best week of the season for Big 12 football. I can't wait, Drew Russell.
Can't wait either, Brandon. I look forward to hopefully having some winners next week.